But I think the true concept of Judaizing here is to actually compel someone to convert to Judaism. Again, whenever we take preferential emphasis on something that is cultural in nature and we prioritize that over the message of the gospel, that's when the gospel is not the gospel. And whenever we take the gospel to the next step to say that that we have a message that you really need to understand this, or else you can't, or you need to do this, and if you're not doing this, then you cannot be saved. That's when the gospel is not the gospel. One of the big things that this really pulls up is this issue of one law theology, because many Messianics that come into Messianic Judaism, they come in and they kind of get enthralled with some of what they're reading and what they're learning about, and they say, man, this is amazing, and where has this been all this time? And the church has lost its Jewish roots. And one of the things that they get sold on is this concept of one law theology. And what is one law theology? Have anybody here heard of that term, one law theology? A few of you have. Yeah, Catherine, you're a FFOZ student, right? Karen's an FFOZ student, so you probably know that. Well, it goes back to a few texts back in the Torah that speaks of Gentiles' inclusion with Israelites. Sam, if you would pull those texts up, he's going to pull up some texts. I've got a few of them here. The first text is actually from, and if you don't have it, that's fine. The first text is from, if you go back to Exodus chapter 12, we just read that last week, Exodus 12, I think it's in verse 47. It says, one law shall there be, the same law, Torah achat, one law shall apply to the native and to the stranger who sojourns among you. Now, anybody know the context of Exodus 12? It has to do with Passover. And it has to do with anybody that wants to partake of the Passover paschal meal, the meat that's been placed upon the altar. If a Gentile wants to partake of that lamb that had been sacrificed on the altar for the Passover meal, they have to undergo the Brit Milah. They have to undergo circumcision. And this is what Moshe says, one law shall apply to the stranger and to the native and to the stranger who sojourns among you. Now, let me tell you where some people that are proponents, and the idea that there are three other passages like this. In fact, let's go to Leviticus 7:7. The guilt offering is like the sin offering. There is one law, Torah achat, for them. The priest who makes atonement with it shall have it. Now, let's go to Numbers 15. Numbers 15:16. There's to be one law and one ordinance for the alien who sojourns with you. And if you go back and you read in that context, it has to do with particular types of offerings that are brought. But what is the position that is often taken by one law proponents is that one Torah, and the term Torah here is an allusion to the entirety of the Torah, all 613 commandments. One law, Torah achat, for the stranger, the ger, who sojourns with you, and for the native. In other words, that the alien or the stranger is under equal obligation to the entirety of the Torah, just as the Jew is, or just as the Israelite is. And that has its context today. Therefore, the entirety of the assembly should be living out the requirements of the Torah, and many would argue in this argument, even amongst the oral Torah observance, that even the way that Judaism practices Judaism today, this is how all followers of Yeshua should be practicing today, based upon a text like this. But what is the alien in this context who sojourns among you? We have to understand that it has an actual literary context of that time setting. It has to do with those that sojourn in the nation of Israel with a functioning temple. And these people will oftentimes state that anywhere that you see alien, that as followers of Yeshua that are Gentile background, we are the aliens. We are the sojourner that sojourn amongst the native of the land. the context and the implication there is that we need to be practicing some kind of picture of Orthodox Jewish practice as followers of Yeshua. That's how this mentality is oftentimes presented. And then you go and you look at the next verse. You have one law from him who does anything unintentionally, for him who is native among the sons, and for the alien who sojourns among them. And again, one thing to point out from all of these texts, do you notice something about these texts where they come in the Torah specifically? They have to do with particular sacrifices that are to be brought into the temple, or they have to do with some kind of cultic practice. When I say cultic, I don't mean cult in the sense that we think of today. It has to do with sacrifices, an animal being brought into at that time, the Mishkan, the tabernacle, or what's later to be known as the temple in Jerusalem. That's where the application of this has to do with these one law statements. My point is that there's an abuse of the text there that doesn't have real application to today, and that oftentimes gets misunderstood, and people come under a false understanding of what they need to be doing as Gentile followers of Yeshua in the 21st century.